Welcome back into another episode of the Believe in Georgia Tech podcast. We are your co-hosts. That is RJ Schafer. I'm Jackson Caudell. Coming to you Saturday morning. We were going to record yesterday in the afternoon, like we typically do. We're with the season over. We've kind of gone to one episode a week, but we wanted to give some transfer portal updates. But we were like, all right, let's see what happens the rest of the day. We'll come back Saturday morning, record, and then put some out. And lo and behold, we had a ton happen Friday afternoon / evening. Some of it good, some of it bad, and we're going to get into that because we know it's been a little bit. We've kind of wanted to let the transfer portal play itself out. The last time we talked to you, Georgia Tech did not have any transfer portal commitments, and now they are sitting at 10. So it has been a very eventful week or so. But first off, RJ, how you doing, man?
Feeling great, man. Transfer portal, as I've said a million times, is probably one of my favorite weeks or couple of weeks
I was about to say, it
for
ain't just
college
one week.
football news.
Yeah.
So many kids transferring, so many people going to new schools. I think it's great for both sides.
Yep. And we're going to talk about there's been departures, there's been additions. We're going to talk about there's been players announcing they're going to come back, most notably the quarterbacks, of course. And then, yes, there's basketball today. I know there's a couple games. We're going to talk about the women's basketball has been tremendous this season. They have a big game against Nebraska today. And then, we do have to talk about the men's side of things as well. Cooper Flagg and Duke are in the building or in Atlanta today. So that'll be a challenge to say the least. So we will briefly talk about that. The games are in a few hours, so we don't have a ton of time to talk about them. But I guess let's just hop right into the transfer portal. And before we talk about the additions, so when we left, like the biggest notable departure, of course, was Eric Singleton Jr. He is still not committed anywhere. That is notable. I don't know what's going to happen there, but I mean, all the crystal balls and all the predictions say Auburn. We'll see. He took a couple visits there. He's still not committed anywhere as of Saturday, December 21st at 9:29 a.m. So I hope that this does not age poorly by the time this episode gets out. But then since then, we've had a couple of more notable departures. I want to talk about Romello Height first because I do think that I think people may be underselling how big of a loss that is. And look, you can look at the stats and say Romello Height has 2.5 sacks, whatever. He came up big in a lot of big moments. Like, he had the forced fumble against Cam Ward to seal that game against Miami. He had some really big moments against Duke and NC State. And he was your best edge rusher by a decent margin. And again, Georgia Tech is losing a lot on the defensive line. Like we've talked about it a little bit before, but Micaiah Scott is gone. Kevin Harris is out of eligibility. Horace Lockett hit the transfer portal. And I know Horace isn't an edge player, but still, just in terms of numbers on the D line, Josh Robinson gone. Sylvain is gone. Thomas Gore and Zeke are gone. Uche Elo hit the transfer portal. And right now you've got Jordan Vandenberg is announced he's coming back, as we'll talk about in a little bit. Amontre Bradford, some young guys, Landon Marshall, Jordan Boyd, Shymeek Jones, Jason Moore. Like those guys are going to come back. But right now, defensive line is the biggest concern for me heading into 2025. And, Romello going to Texas Tech, like that, it's a loss. Is Romello Height a top 10 pick, first-round draft pick? I don't think so. But would he have been very valuable to your team next year? Absolutely. Like that is I think it's a pretty big loss just because of the numbers you're losing on the defensive line and your outlook for there. And then we will talk about the Ronald Triplet, the UTSA edge rusher that they picked up from the portal, including him in that group. But and also before we get your thoughts on Romello, Malik Rutherford entered the portal, of course, last night. So assuming that Eric Singleton does not come back, I think that is a pretty big loss if somehow Singleton did come back. Again, I'm not reporting that Singleton's come back or anything. Just the fact he hasn't committed anywhere is, I do think, sort of notable. But if he were to come back, I think the loss is lessened just with the additions of Eric Rivers, Dean Patterson, and the kid from South Carolina. But if Singleton does indeed end up going to Auburn, like that could be a pretty big loss. And you've got question marks at receiver, even with the guys you got coming in.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about Romello Height, he will highlight the sack numbers a lot. Again, that doesn't tell the full story. If you're not really into advanced analytics or even, I guess not advanced analytics, pressure percentage is a much better determiner of if a edge rusher is good or not. I believe Ronald White had the highest pressure percentage because a lot of times he did get double teamed last season because he was the best edge rusher. I think that is a huge loss. Alongside Malik Rutherford, who I don't know if he's better than Eric Singleton, but he fit the Georgia Tech offensive scheme so much better than pretty much any receiver will do. And we'll talk about Eric Rivers later. I kind of think he fills that role. But Malik Rutherford is the traditional Buster Faulkner wide receiver, can do anything, very good after the catch, and can do some things in the run game as well. So I just thought that was a big scheme loss. Again, I think Roman's the opposite because I don't think he fits the scheme very well, but he is an extremely talented player. I mean, could be a day one, day two NFL draft pick too.
Yeah. And I mean, on your point about Rutherford, I will point out that, again, and we said this with the Singleton episode, and I just want to reiterate it again. Until these kids sign, just because you go in the portal doesn't mean you can't come back. Like, there is a chance Malik Rutherford could come back. I don't know the percentage on that. I've not heard that. But there is always a chance he could come back. The same thing we said about Singleton, who, again, has not signed anywhere as of this morning. So, look, we'll see how that plays out. I do think they both could potentially be really big losses. Again, we'll see what they do in the transfer portal the rest of the way as far as it goes with the defensive line. And you are getting some young guys like Christian Garrett's going to come in on the interior. Like he's a guy that I do expect to play right away. Andre Fuller and Carrington Coombs, other edge rusher, the two edge rushers that a couple of the edge rushers they're bringing in from the 2025 class, like they possibly could have a chance to play right away. You're really going to bank on some unproven guys on the defensive line, and assuming Rutherford and Singleton are gone, it's going to be the same thing with the receivers as well. Just you're going to have to depend on some guys. So there's some everything's still kind of shaping up, and we'll see how all the pieces fit together. But I do think they're losses. Like you would rather have those guys than not. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think wide receiver is kind of an underrated position to lose players at because having a bunch of over at wide receiver, as we saw with some other teams this year, is not always, the best recipe for success.
Yeah. Well, I guess let's get into who has come in. And that is, look, again, when we last recorded, Georgia Tech did not have any transfer portal commitments, and we're just going to kind of talk about them one by one and kind of what the impact could be. So I guess I want to start with Dayquon White first. I mean, he was the first commitment. And one thing I want to note about a lot of these kids is they played high school in Georgia. Like, they may not have gone to school in college in Georgia, but a lot of them played high school in Georgia. Dayquon White being one of them. Went to Eastern Michigan, played for a couple of years, was really solid in those couple of years as well. Like, where do you see him kind of fitting in the secondary? And look, there's not a ton of losses in the secondary, but you are losing. Lamiles Brooks is out of eligibility. Warren Burrell is out of eligibility. Tay Seymour transferred to Auburn. So kind of where do you see him fitting in right now?
Yeah, I think he could be a rotational outside piece because being from Eastern Michigan, of course, I had to see a game. He's 30 minutes away from where I live. He is a really good cover corner. I don't know if he would fit into the slot role that Georgia Tech kind of needs, but I think he could fight for a start. I'm just not entirely sure if I see that week one.
Yeah, I think that will be pretty interesting to see how the net ends up. He's 5'10", 170 pounds. Last season per PFF, Pro Football Focus, for anybody that doesn't know, 660 snaps this past season and a 66.2 overall grade. He did get a 79.2 grade in run defense, which was pretty solid. 2023, he had a 69.5 grade, a little bit higher than this past season. He played 558 snaps. Like, he's played pretty much since the time he arrived at Eastern Michigan. Like, it's not like he's redshirted or anything. Like, he's played a lot of football in his time so far. Played at Creekside High School. I know he had offers from Liberty and East Carolina coming out of the portal. Like, he's a guy I'm kind of interested in. And like you said, whether it's on the outside or in the nickel, like, you've got Rodney Shelley coming back to play the nickel. And we talked about, Warren Burrell being gone. Amari Harvey said he's probably coming back. I think that's what him and Jamal Haynes both said the other day. I haven't seen like an official graphic from them with some of the other guys yet. And then you've got, guys like Zachary Toby and and some others there. So the corner position that battle beside to be opposite of Amari Harvey is going to be very interesting. But I think Daquon Right absolutely could be in that mix. Also, just staying in the secondary, Kelvin Hill from UAB was one of my favorite. He was one of the more underrated guys that I thought in the transfer portal. Yeah. Do you see kind of the same thing from him, or do you view him differently than Daquon White?
I view him a little bit differently, as you noted before we went on here. He also had a really PFF grade in terms of tackling and run defense, I believe better than Daquon White. Daquon White. 90.1 tackling grade on PFF, 87-point run defense. I think he could be a guy that could sneak into a nickel role. I think he's less of an outside wide receiver just because he is so good at run defense, kind of can play a lot of roles. But he was another guy I was really excited about as well.
Yeah, and they're similar size. I mean, Kelvin Hill is 5'10", 175 pounds, and played a ton of snaps. Like he didn't redshirt last year. Come out of Carrollton High School, had 42 tackles, 5 pass deflections this past season. So he's what I'm kind of excited about. Like I think that could be a very underrated addition. Again, played a ton of stuff. UAB wasn't very good last year. I will point that out, but he is a talented player who I think can really fit in the secondary. Which do you think is most likely to make an impact in the secondary between those two?
I think they'll both play a decent amount, but I think White is probably set to make this impact because he fits more into the outside role than Hill will.
Okay. Yeah, I would probably agree with you. Like he's kind of the guy I'm looking at. And then again, I'm kind of going in chronological order of when these kids committed. So you had those two commit, and then it was a little bit, and then you got DeAndre Gatling from South Carolina, the wide receiver. Again, and if I mispronounce anybody's name, I really do apologize. I'm really bad at that, so it's not intentional. I promise. He is another kid. He played his high school in the state of Georgia. He did not play this past year at South Carolina. I don't really have a ton to say about him, and it has nothing to do with his talent. He just hasn't played. He played at Milton High School in Georgia. Was a really, really good player there. I know Georgia Tech recruited him out of high school. Didn't play at South Carolina this past year, so he'll be an interesting addition to the receiver room. And again, I think it just kind of depends on how everything shakes out. Like the receiver room is kind of in flux until you get final decisions from a couple of guys. So, do you see him as a guy that could vie for playing time this upcoming year?
I think he might. I think you have a large group of guys fighting for a couple of spots in the wide receiver room because I think with your 2 transfer portal commitments, I think those spots are pretty much locked up. Everywhere else in the wide receiver room, I mean, it's pretty like you have Stockton and Canyon most likely fighting for those spots. But any of the freshmen, any of the sophomores, I could see them filling that role too.
Yeah, I agree. Another guy. Now, I really liked offensive lineman Andrew Razinski coming out of high school. Also played in the state of Georgia, went to North Carolina, did not play this past season, redshirted. I think he could come in and at the very least provide you depth. Now, we've talked about the offensive line, in kind of our transfer portal preview and just kind of looking at the roster and kind of what needed to be done. So you've pretty much got, 3 spots locked up next year. Brent Key talked about Ethan McKinney playing left tackle at his press conference the other day. You've got Joe Fusile coming back at left guard. You've got Keelan Rutledge announced he's coming back, first team all ACC guard. So you've kind of got center and right tackle open. You've recruited a lot of offensive linemen in the high scoring the past couple of years. So we kind of were talking about some guys that could come in and compete. I don't think it's crazy he could compete for a job. Do you?
Yeah, I don't think it's crazy either, and I think it would be nice, especially with all of the freshman tackles and offensive linemen that you have coming in, bringing a guy in from another program that obviously Mac Brown has a lot of history as a coach, bringing in a guy that can bring some culture, bring, I guess, a veteran atmosphere. I know he's only been there 1 year, but some presence for the freshman guys because a lot of the depth at offensive line is just freshmen. So I think Brent looking to get guys that have some experience, whether that be on the field or guys that have redshirted.
Yeah. And then, I'll get to to the big one. Not literally, but, just in terms of commitment. Eric Rivers, that was huge. Like that, I hope people understand how big that was, especially, given if Singleton does indeed go to Auburn or somewhere else and Rutherford does follow through and transfer. Like, getting Eric Rivers is such a massive addition to the room. He is, I talked about it on social media. He is absolutely blazing fast. Like he is a very, very fast receiver. He's a kind of a prototypical slot receiver. I mean, he's 5'11", 175, third-team All-American this past year. Caught 62 passes for nearly 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns, and averaged nearly 19 yards a catch. I mean, 18.9. So you're close enough right there. From Chattanooga, Tennessee. He was the first of the transfers. It wasn't from the state of Georgia as far as commitments, but he's still kind of a somewhat local guy. Not very far away. He was rated. He's the highest rated transfer in Georgia Tech's class right now. And I just on a side note, one thing just for me personally over the past few years is I don't honestly. I put a lot more stock into recruiting rankings than I do transfer rankings at this point. There are nearly 2,000 players in the transfer portal, and I think it is so hard to evaluate them all in a proper way. And I encourage everybody, go look at the transfer portal rankings last year, whether it was player or team, and look at who panned out and who didn't. A lot of the teams who took so many transfers and got a lot of these highly rated kids in these top transfer portal classes flopped in a big way. Like, go look at Florida State is the best example I can give. Like, a lot of these schools that rely so heavily on the portal, it just didn't work out for them. Now, you had some, it worked out pretty well. Like, Ole Miss did pretty well in the portal. Indiana obviously was built to, they had the most transfers of anybody, got them a spot in the college football playoff. Look, they lost last night, but they still got in the playoff. That's just something I wouldn't put too much stock into transfer portal rankings. That's just how I look at it personally. That doesn't mean that, I'm saying that just because, Georgia Tech is not ranked number one or doesn't have a top 10 portal class. It's just something going forward, I'm not putting quite as much stock as I used to, kind of when the transfer portal was becoming a thing. But just a little sidebar there from me. But yeah, Rivers is rated as a 4-star transfer. The number 12, he was the number 12 receiver in the portal at the time. I haven't gone back and looked at the update because there's just so many players entering the portal like every day. But at the time, he was a number 12 receiver, and that was kind of maybe the most loaded position in the portal this past year, or this year, not this past year. Like currently, right now, you've had a ton of receivers entering the portal. I think Rivers is a very, very good player. Finished with an 83.2 grade in PFF, 614 snaps. The one thing I will say, and I do think people have pointed out as well, the step up in competition is going to be big. Like there's no doubt about it. Look, I would argue that Conference USA, which is what FIU played in, is probably the worst conference in the FBS. I think it's probably worse than the MAC, to be perfectly honest. Like it's really bad. But go watch his film, and I think he is a guy that can translate. I don't think it's going to be Eric Rivers is going to disappear because now he's playing at the Power 4 level. Like I think he is a legit guy. I think he is an NFL type prospect, and I think he is just a huge addition to this offense.
Yeah, and getting an All-American title, that's not just something you throw out to a guy based on numbers. Like, he absolutely dominated the CUSA. I think that's fair to say. And I think the step up in competition, he's not going to dominate the ACC. There are so many talented, very athletic players in the ACC. I still do think he's going to do amazing. As I kind of mentioned before, he's very similar to Malik Rutherford. He is super, super fast. He fits the bill of that slot receiver so well. And most of the time, he's the fastest guy in the field.
Yeah, and I think that's going to continue to be the case because, like I said, the number one thing he brings is speed. That is the number one thing that he's going to bring. I'm really excited to see him work in this offense, and he could end up being the number one target for Haynes King next year.
And he made some crazy catches last year because his quarterback play was not always amazing.
Nope.
I think he's going to have a huge step up in quarterback play.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like I'm hating on the kid, but that FIU quarterback was really bad last year. So
yeah.
The fact that him and the receiver we're going to talk about, Dean Patterson, in just a little bit, the fact that they put up the numbers they did is frankly amazing to me. Then the sixth edition, we talked a little bit about him in the defensive line. Ronald Triplet from UTSA. Yeah. He started out as a Kansas State transfer. He transferred to UTSA, played 3 years. I think he's going to have a chance to play, obviously, right away with the losses that Georgia Tech has had on the defensive line. In 3 seasons with the Roadrunners, had 58 tackles, 5.5 sacks. He is another one. He graded really well on PFF this past year. He was graded as their best defender. He was 87.4, which is really good. And he had an 85.1 pass rushing grade. Played 318 snaps too. So one thing, when I'm looking at PFF, if I see a high grade, like the first thing I go look at is the snap count, because there are sometimes you'll get a kid with a 95 snap count and he's played like 15 snaps, and it's not really representative of the work that he's put in. But he played over 300 snaps, and I do think it's notable, having those kind of grades. Again, the competition will always get brought up. Like he was playing better opponents than, say, FIU was. Like UTSA is in the AAC, and that's not a bad conference at all. But again, the ACC is of course a step up. In 2023, he did not have as high a grade. He had a 69 flat grade, 217 snaps. 2022 had a 67.4 grade and 275 snaps. And again, I say this all the time, and people probably get sick of it. PFF is not the gospel. Like, I'm not sitting here saying that that's all you need to go off of. I think it's a helpful tool to use to see a player, but they are wrong sometimes, just like we all are. So when I'm saying these numbers and everything, like, it's not like just don't take it as the only word you should hear, and PFF is always right or wrong. I know I say that a lot, but it's true. But what did you think about this addition, and do you agree with me that he will probably be an instant contributor?
Yeah, I'm not sure if he'll start out of the gate, but I do think he will definitely be a rotational guy. He'll definitely, I don't want to say definitely because, anything can happen, but he will probably be in the 2 deep as the year starts. He's a guy that has a ton of experience, and you're bringing in a lot of edge rusher recruits like we talked about earlier. Don't have a ton of experience. Like defensive line and offensive line were the 2 positions that you hit hard in high school recruiting this year. And you need to bring in some guys to have a veteran presence. And I think Triplet has that. He's not the biggest when it comes to size. He's 6'2", 250. But I do think he has the skills to be able to compete against ACC linemen. Great, haven't seen him against that level of competition or guys of that size. So very unproven. He could be a guy that breaks out because you don't really know what you have in him.
Yep. I mean, I agree with you on all that. Like, he's going to have a chance to play right away. He could be a very underrated transfer portal additions. Look at the production he had, and then the grades that he earned on PFF, and you can talk yourself into him being a pretty good player. Yesterday was busy like that. Like, Dayquon White, and Kelvin Hill and DeAndre Gatling were all kind of like earlier, and then there was kind of a gap between them, and then Razinski committing, and then Triplet committing on Thursday, and then yesterday was just an absolute busy day. And then it got started with Cal transfer tight end JT Byrne. As soon as I saw this commitment, the first thing popped in my head, the Jackson Halls replacement. And that's pretty much, I think, what this is. And look, Jackson Halls was incredible from a run blocking perspective. Like, it earned him a Senior Bowl invite, and I think is going to get drafted based solely on his ability to block. Like, Jackson Halls is one of the most underrated tight ends in the country, and I will absolutely die on that hill. Like, go watch his tape, and his run blocking is absolutely phenomenal in a ton of games. But I think that's the role he's going to fill. And me and you talked about this when looking at the roster, was the tight end position. You're losing Halls is gone. He's out of eligibility. Avery Boyd is out of eligibility. Rylan Goday is out of eligibility. So coming back, you had Luke Harpering, who is very talented, but still a young guy. You got Josh Beetham coming back. You signed 2 guys in the 2025 class, and you have David Prince, who was a 2024 recruit, hasn't played yet. So you had some inexperienced guys. So you were probably looking to kind of fill some roles. Like, Goday was used a lot as blocking. Halls was used a lot as blocking. Avery Boyd was kind of your receiving tight end. But you have to block in this offense. Like, tight end is a very important position in the offense, and not from a receiving perspective. Like, you have to be able to block. And Byrne does that. 6'6", 240, got a 78.5 run blocking grade. Now, he only played 63 snaps last year. So, like, that should be pointed out. Like, he hasn't played just a ton. But in the snaps that he did, I think that's what he's going to be asked to do. Like, I don't think he's going to be on the field every play of the game. I don't think right now. Maybe that changes. But I think he's going to be a huge asset in the run game for the Yellow Jackets next year.
Yeah, and I think he is kind of similar to the tight end additions from last year, because when Goday and Hawes and Beetham all came in last year, they were kind of question marks. Hawes obviously played at Yale, FCS guy. Goday was at Mississippi State for a short period of time, and we didn't really know what we saw in them, but we knew that they were either very versatile players or they were good players. And I think that we see in him, and I think Brent he has a very good eye on transfer tight ends. That's a very weird niche to be in, but you know, I trust him seeing a guy based off of 60 snaps, giving him a scholarship and saying, "Hey, we want you to come block for us," and I think that's exactly what it's going to be.
Yeah, and I should mention like Brett Seither has another
Yeah.
You know, he didn't play this past year because of an injury, but he has one more year left in him. He announced he was coming back the other day. That had kind of been rumored, but like he made it official the other day. So you have experience, and we're going to get to the other tight end that they brought in as well. But yeah, that was the first thing that popped in my head was that's your Jackson Hall's replacement as far as run blocking goes. The second addition yesterday was another really big one. Dean Patterson, another FIU transfer. Him and Eric Rivers are close. They're going to be playing together. Now, Patterson is a different player. He's 6'2", 202 pounds, caught 50 passes last year, 685 yards, 7 touchdowns, averaged 13.7 yards per catch. Played 4 years there. His big breakout year was this past year. So total, he's caught 98 passes for a little over 1,400 yards and 8 touchdowns. PFF grade, he got a 74.9 and 679 snaps, which was the 6th highest on FIU's offense. That's a lot of snaps on FIU's offense. Given the flux of the receiver position right now, I think he is probably maybe a day one starter, just given his size and production and experience. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And after that commitment was made official, I thought that FIU to Georgia Tech line was completely open, because there was that FIU cornerback. He did end up committing to Cal. Hezekiah, I'm forgetting his last name, Hezekiah something cornerback that I thought was going to come with Rivers and Patterson. But when you have a lot of turnover at a position, having 2 players that have played together and already have chemistry at the position is huge. Because I think out of all the starters, they're all going to be from different places. I think you're going to have, one guy that's probably homegrown from Georgia Tech, and then you're going to have 2 guys from FIU, which I think helps you build with that turnover, especially at wide receiver. Position can be very volatile at times.
Yep. I really like this addition as well. I think he's, again, a good fit in the offense. And look, he doesn't have like the flashiness of Eric Rivers, but he's a very solid player in his own right. And look, other schools wanted him too, is the thing. Like this is when you had to fight out. I felt pretty good about it after Eric Rivers committed. But yeah, Dean Patterson being on board is really big. Then the second offensive line addition, third addition yesterday, JUCO offensive lineman Jacoby Jones. Again, I think he's a JUCO kid, has 3 years of eligibility left. He's a tackle. I think he's going to come in and compete, be a depth piece. Who knows? Maybe even compete for a starter spot. I think it's just going to depend on how he can hit the ground running and learn the offense and learn everything about it and fit in with it. I mean, what did you think of this addition?
Yeah, I thought it was actually a pretty solid addition because there were a ton of other schools pursuing it. I think he had 15 D1 offers, something around that area. But being, having the size that he has, being 6'5", being 300 pounds, I think he already, is Division I level ready to play. I don't know if he'll necessarily start, but there's so many guys vying for that right tackle spot, and I think he's going to be thrown into the water and be competing for that spot. He has the size. Maybe the technique isn't there, but playing in JUCO, being for one guy in your JUCO team, I think he has the opportunity to bring a lot. Again, just with the JUCO guy, he's really unproven, so I'm not entirely sure what you have with him.
Yeah, and that's I think the kid could be talented. Look, JUCO kids are hard to evaluate. I'm not going to sit here and act like I just know what he's about up and down. We'll see. Like I have a pretty good trust when it comes to Brent Key and Jeep Wade evaluating offensive linemen. Like I think that's pretty clear that they're pretty good at doing that and coaching them up as well. So we'll see how that ends up turning out. But you had another tight end addition yesterday, Harry Lodge from Wake Forest, another big body. I assume I'm kind of wondering what his role will be because when JT Byrne committed and you go and you look at the PFF grades and you look at kind of how he was used, like he was used as a run blocking tight end. So Lodge is a little different. He caught 12 passes for 110 yards last year. He only got a 48-point overall grade in 400 snaps for Wake Forest. And again, I want to reiterate, PFF is not the gospel. Like it is not the end-all be-all, but it is like kind of a good baseline to learn about players. He only got a 46.4 grade in run blocking. Again, 6'6", 240. I'll be interested to see how he's inserted in the offense and how he's used.
Yeah, I kind of look at him as similar to the Josh Beetham edition.
Yeah.
I don't really know a whole lot about what he's going to be. I think he could be a guy that you have come in, to give a rest to the other tight ends and be able to block a little bit. But he has that upward threat. Like we saw that a little bit last year at Wake Forest. I believe he caught one touchdown. I don't think he is going to be the tried and true blocking guy, but I think he is a more diverse end than JT Byrne will be.
Yeah, I would agree. I'll just be interested to see how he's used. And again, they want bodies at the tight end position because again, we saw this year like there were injuries to tight end position. Like every board was banged up a little bit throughout the year. Brett Seither had a season-ending injury before they even played Florida State. And you had just several guys banged up. You had Luke Harper, he had to play a good bit against. I think it was North Carolina where he had that big catch, like 30-something yard catch where he got down to the red zone. You just had to have a lot of guys kind of forced into duty. And again, tight ends are a very vital part of the offense in Buster Faulkner's offense. So I'll be interested to see where he fits in. And then the final commitment of last night and the last one for now, like as of now, it's 9:59 a.m. on Saturday, December 21st. So if there's any other commitments past this one, I'm sorry when the episode comes out. Kamen Spalding, Tennessee Tech linebacker. Like the same thought I had about Byrne being the Hall's replacement, Spalding to me is a Trinelius Tatum replacement because you're bringing back everybody else in the linebacker room outside of Tatum. Like Kyle Eifert is back, EJ Lights is back, Tajay Butler's back, Jackson Hamilton is back. But now you have, a fifth linebacker that had some experience. Again, it's going to be a big step up in competition. He was a pretty solid player at Tennessee Tech, 66 tackles, 3 sacks this past season, got a 76.1 grade PFF and 623 snaps. So, again, I think he looks like a solid addition. The thing with the linebackers is it's a little bit like the tight ends is like there's different roles and guys play like a certain amount of snaps. Like Eifert is going to play the most because he's the best of the bunch, but like everybody else kind of has their roles too. And like Tatum was like a good player. Like he was a big reason they won that NC State game. Like he played really well down the stretch. He had a pretty solid game against Georgia as well, if I'm remembering correctly. So, again, the step up in competition is going to be pretty big. I'm not going to sit here and guarantee he's going to be this, going to be that. I think he'll be a rotational depth piece that'll kind of play the role that Tatum did.
Yeah, I'd say the same. And I think he is good enough as an athlete. Like he's from the state of Georgia. Most of the guys in this transfer class are. But he is good enough as an athlete where he could compete. I don't see a scenario where he starts, but he's another guy that brings a ton of experience to a room where you have a lot of young, where you have a lot of freshmen. And I think that's a recurring theme that we see in Brent Key's transfer portal classes.
Yep, that's the thing. And, kind of my last thing on the transfer portal and these guys and everything is that, transfer portal is not just bringing in starters and trying to find instant plug-and-play players. Like Georgia Tech is pretty solid at a lot of spots. A lot of it can be used for depth as well. Like it's you can never be too deep at any positions, and with so many kids entering the portal, you can find diamonds in the rough that can come in and be depth guys for you and be rotational players. Like you can never have enough guys at the position, and you see what quality depth does for you. Like having Aaron Philo to come in the NC State game and the Miami games and make plays when Haynes King was banged up. You saw it at various different positions. There does become a point, like, in the Georgia game, you kind of were, the corners were just dropping like flies in that game, and you just had a lot of injuries in the defensive backfield. But I do think, I think that's what the transfer portal this cycle so far is being used for. And I think some of these guys will be instant impact starters. Like I think Eric Rivers will be a day one guy. I think Dean Patterson could be a day one guy. I think Triplet possibly could be a day one guy. We'll kind of see there. And then the guys in the secondary as well. But if nothing else, like it is important depth that can be used. Any other thoughts on the portal or what's happening?
Yeah, I think it's huge going back to the state of Georgia, players that were from the state of Georgia, that either you didn't offer out of high school, swung out on high school, and you're bringing it back to Georgia Tech. Like, I don't have the exact number on this, but I would like to believe that over 60, maybe 70% of the guys on the roster now are from Georgia. And I think bringing back that pipeline is so huge.
Yep, I agree 100% with you. So I guess let's get into the other thing. There have been a lot of key players announcing they're going to come back. Look, I don't want to make this some like big 2025 preview, looking at the schedule game by game and evaluating the roster, because there's still just a lot of things in flux when it comes to the roster as far as 2025 goes. But I do think there are pieces in place where it could be a big year next year for Georgia Tech. Obviously, the headliners are going to be Haynes King and Aaron Philo coming back. Look, Haynes King, you saw when he was out this year how much he means to the offense, just his versatile ability, be a dual-threat quarterback. You saw it. Look no further than the Georgia game. Look how important Haynes King is to Georgia Tech, and having him back is just going to be just massive. Jamal Haynes has said he is probably coming back. Like I said earlier, there hasn't been like a lot of these guys that have said they're coming back, they've had like a graphic, made and everything. I haven't seen that for Jamal Haynes yet. I could be mistaken. And apologies if so, but I haven't seen that. But he did say during the press conference the other day that he planned on coming back. Brett Seither said he's coming back. Keelan Rutledge, first team All ACC guard, was a huge transfer portal addition last year. He said he's coming back. You had Harrison Moore, who was he played a valuable role as far as depth goes. Just what we were talking about. He was a recruit last year, but he announced he is coming back as well. I thought it was. Maybe it went under the radar that Jordan Vandenberg is coming back, because if he didn't, you were going to have some real issues on the defensive line. Having him back is going to be massive. Omar Daniels, Rodney Shelley announced they were coming back. And Omar Daniels he flew under the radar last year too. When he moved to safety, he was playing a lot better than he was when he was playing at nickel. Like, I'm not saying he was like an All-American first-round pick type guy, but like he really kind of found a role for himself. And I'm kind of wondering how everything shakes out there. But long story short, to me, it was a lot of important guys announcing they're going to come back. And look, Georgia Tech is always going to have a hard schedule because they play Georgia at the end of the year. But Notre Dame's not on it next year. Look, I know Georgia Tech has had a lot of success against Miami as of late, but they still have a very talented roster, but they're not on the schedule next year. Florida State's not on it next year. And I have absolutely zero clue as to what to expect from them next year. But, it wasn't just but 2 years ago where they did go undefeated, and then they had back-to-back 10-win seasons, and that's a talented roster still. So they're not on the schedule. You got Clemson, who is playing Texas today. I'll be kind of interested to see how much of their roster's back next year. Like, they've got some young talented guys. Like, that'll be a very challenging game. You open the year at Colorado. Obviously, we know Shador and Travis Hunter are not going to be a part of that team. They just picked up Liberty transfer Caden Salter, which I'll be interested to see how that goes. He didn't have as good of a year this past year as he did in 2023, but again, I'm not going to get into the whole 2025 schedule. But there is a path where I do think Georgia Tech can contend for a spot in the ACC championship game. And if that does happen, then you're competing for a playoff spot given the current format. So I do think it's possible. I still have some concerns at some positions, like defensive line is a big concern to me right now. It is. If assuming that Rutherford and Singleton are not back on the team next year, even with the additions of Rivers and Patterson, receiver becomes a concern to me just as far as depth goes. Like, I think those two guys are good, but you have a lot of unproven guys behind them. Talented guys, but unproven guys as well. So we'll see. And then you have areas of the team that have to improve. Like I like the additions they made in the secondary. Also, the secondary wasn't great this past year. Like there were games where quarterbacks threw for a lot of, look at Syracuse, look at Louisville, even Cam Ward, even in that win, like he threw for a lot of yards in that game. So, not perfect, not where they want it to be yet, but I do think it has the potential to be a very talented roster going into 2025, and getting a lot of these key guys back was huge. And my last point on that, and I promise I'll let you talk, but I know I see some of the sentiment, I think it's bad that players have to announce they're coming back to their school or this and that. I do think it gives fans, and this is just from my perspective, like I'm happy if somebody says I'm wrong on this. I think it is nice to hear from those guys that they're going to be back so you don't have to ask about it. Because I think in this day and age, anybody can leave. Like it's possible, you have guys jumping around from team to team. And I think it is nice to hear, hey, this guy is definitely going to be back, instead of having to wonder, man, I wonder if he's going to be back. I know he hadn't said he's leaving, but I wonder if he's going to be back. I do think it maybe gives fans a nice peace of mind that these guys say they're coming back. That's just my perspective, though.
Yeah, I agree, but I'm going to have a little bit of a sidebar on that. I think it's bad that the system that we have right now requires that to be possible, where a lot of the time impact players on your team, they're going to get more money if they go somewhere else. And incoming freshmen might get more than some of your biggest impact players, and I think that's a big problem. But in terms of Georgia Tech, I think it's huge having all those guys come back. And I think it's also huge to note, I don't think Georgia Tech is in the transfer portal. They still have a ton of spots open. There's still a ton of guys that they're going after. And I think if you add a couple of impact players on the defensive line, if you add a couple more depth pieces, maybe another wide receiver, I think you're in a really good spot, and I think you're in a better spot than you were last year, because last year's schedule was so hard. You had an amazing roster. You probably had a top 5 roster in the ACC, but the record didn't show that. And I think next year you're in a better position. You don't play SMU. You don't play Miami. You don't play most of the top teams in the ACC. So I'm just really excited for what next year can hold, and I think this is Brent Key's year where he's going to, prove to the ACC that he belongs. I think he's already done that, but do it to a bigger extent next year.
Yeah, and I just the one thing as of right now I can say about going to next year is you might have the best quarterback in the conference if he's healthy. I think Cade Klubnik's coming back. I haven't seen anything about him going to the NFL, and I don't think he should. But Kevin Jennings is probably going to be back at SMU. But again, Cam Ward is leaving Miami. Miami has as talented as their roster is, they're going to have a massive question at quarterback next year. I think Haynes King is better than Thomas Castellanos at Florida State. And some of the other guys, well, I know Kyron Drones is going to be back at Virginia Tech, but they're an absolute mess right now. So we'll kind of see what you get out of them. Eli Holstein will be back at Pitt. I don't want to get this wrong, but is Kyle McCord out of eligibility? I think he is, isn't he?
He might be. I'm not entirely sure on that either.
Well, if he were to be back at Syracuse, like he obviously had a very good season this past year, but we'll see. But yeah, you might have the best quarterback in the conference, and that should be a comforting thing going into a lot of your games next year. But we'll kind of save the rest of the thoughts on 2025, because the thing is, you've still got, like you were just saying, this is not the end of the transfer portal. It closes a week from today, but that doesn't mean that the activity is going to stop, because players that are already in the portal can commit and do things elsewhere. Got the bowl game coming up next Friday. That's where obviously a lot of the focus is going to be. So I think it's been a solid transfer portal class so far. I do think the losses of Singleton, Rutherford, and Romello Height do sting. Like I'm not going to pretend that they don't. You would have loved to have those guys back next year, and then you really could have been, no doubt, one of the top teams heading into the year. And I still think they can be, but I do think that there are some holes. Like there's no doubt about it. But before we get out of here, I know in a few hours we do got some basketball games today. I want to start with the good basketball team right now. The women's team has been phenomenal. They're still undefeated. They absolutely put a beat down on Rice. I was covering that game, and they just overmatched Rice in a big way. Final non-conference game of the year, I do believe. Number 23, Nebraska coming in. Nebraska's only lost one game. They've kind of had a bit of a soft schedule so far, but man, I've loved watching this Nell Fortner team, man. Like they have done a really good job. Obviously, Danny Carnegie is really, really good. they've just been a blast to watch. I thought they should have gotten into the top 15 after going on the road and beat North Carolina. Personally, that's just me. But they have an opportunity to continue to rise with a win today. And man, what a story that would be. Like, I think they've been one of the – and I don't even think they're getting enough attention for what they're doing either. Just me. Like,
I mean, being an undefeated team this late into the season, I mean, there's almost over. They only have 2 more games in December.
And they've beat good teams. Like, they went on the road, beat North Carolina. Georgia is a pretty good team. Oregon is a pretty good team. Mississippi State is a pretty good team. And I just don't feel like they're getting enough credit for it. But we definitely want to give them credit here on this show for sure.
And they're ranked. Oh, this is the one thing that made me mad when the AP came out. They are ranked below Kentucky, who lost by, let's get this right. They lost by 19 to North Carolina. Georgia Tech dog-walked North Carolina for 3 quarters. They were up 20 by the end of the third quarter. I just don't see what you see in Kentucky losing by 20 to a team that Georgia Tech pretty much beat by 20. Having them over Georgia Tech, I just thought that was egregious.
Yeah, no respect, man. No respect. And then, the men's team, they do play Duke today. I know it hasn't been fun on that side of things this year. I know we haven't talked. We've been mainly focused on football. We've obviously been covering and keeping up with basketball. It's not been pretty, especially against some of the better teams they played. Like, the Northwestern game this past Sunday was ugly. Anytime they have a step up in competition, it does not look good this year. The ACC is, I will just go ahead and say, it is not good right now.
Yeah.
But Duke is, at least in my mind, they are by far and away the best team right now in the ACC. I think in the AP poll, the only other ranked ACC team is Clemson. I think Pitt's pretty good, and North Carolina has talent. I don't know how well they're coached, to be perfectly honest, but again, this isn't a North Carolina podcast. And then there's just a mess of teams, but you're facing the top team today. Obviously, the headliner is going to be Cooper Flagg. I can tell you just from watching, I'm sure most of y'all know, I do cover the Atlanta Hawks in the NBA, and I've kind of, he will not be on the Hawks, but just doing some scouting and looking at him, he is an incredible player, especially defensively. He is already a very, very high level player. I think the offensive game is still coming around a little bit, but he is already an incredible defensive player that does a lot of things well. And I'm interested to see him play today. And look, Duke is the only team that's beaten Auburn this year. That their losses have been, I believe, did they lose to Kansas? They only have to.
SEC. I thought it was an SEC school.
Well, apologies for that, but I thought one of their losses was to Kansas. But they only have 2 losses this year, and they've played a pretty grueling schedule already, as Duke does. Obviously Duke is going to play a lot of headliners at the start of the year. But just some things I'm looking for. Some of the younger guys, like Darian Sutton, got his first real run the other day. Jaden Mustafa has been playing a lot more lately. Lance Terry continues to play pretty well. Just getting off to better starts. That there have been – you see some flashes every now and then of summer, but they are just getting off to some just putrid starts. Like the Northwestern game was just, really bad the other day. And, I want to see them compete for 4 quarters. That is the number one thing I want to see. So, yeah, they lost by 3 points to Kansas and by 5 to Kentucky.
Okay.
So they've lost 2 games to 2 really good teams by a combined 8 points. They've got wins over Auburn and Arizona, as well as they beat Louisville by 11 in their first ACC game.
Yeah, in Auburn, who I think is a national title contender. I think they're by and away the favorite.
Go look at KenPom, and Auburn is at least when I last checked, they were a good bit ahead. Auburn has a 35.33 net rating. The next closest is Tennessee at 31.46. They are right now 4 points better in net rating than anybody else in the country. Coincidentally,
shout out Miles Kelly.
Shout out Miles Kelly. Duke is 3rd right now at 31.36. The only 3 teams over a 30 net rating right now are Auburn, Tennessee, and Duke. So it's safe to say Duke is a very, 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 very good team this year. I know they've kind of fallen short under John Shire a little bit with all the talent they've had, but I think this is a very, very good team. And again, you got to. I want to see how they stack up against the best. That's I guess where I'm keeping.
And like you said about competing for 4 quarters, Georgia Tech, I don't know if you're aware of this drop-off. They are 33rd in first-half points per game, which is not bad. Where do you think they rank second-half points per game in Division I?
It's not good.
218th. Drop off by 3 points in the second half. So it's going to be crucial for them to get off to a good start because we've seen how bad starts can kind of ruin the Georgia Tech game. Yeah. And it's, probably the hardest opponent you're going to face all year.
Yeah. And I do need to correct myself. I say 4 quarters. I know it's 2 halves, but it's I get it's the same principle still. It's just I want to see them compete for the whole game because like I said, Northwestern just gets out to a huge start and just they couldn't really recover. And they did have a pretty decent start against Oklahoma, not offensively, but they did start a lot better in that game than they have in the past. But I would just like to see this team be in the game from start to finish because there are just too many against good teams this year. They're either out of it early or there's they kind of like Oklahoma, they kind of competed early and then Oklahoma pulls away late. Like I'd love to see 40 minutes of competing from start to finish from this team. That's what I'm looking for today. I don't expect them to win the game. They did last year, but I don't expect them to win this game, but we'll see. Any other thoughts on basketball?
Nope. Just can't get wiped off the floor. That's not at your home stadium.
Yeah, that'd be bad. But we appreciate you guys for tuning in. I know we took a little bit long to publish the episode, but we just wanted to kind of have some things happen in the transfer portal, and then we can talk about it. We're not going to have an emergency podcast for every single episode or every single portal commitment. We want to kind of let things happen and kind of evaluate them as we go from there. There's going to be plenty of portal things happening in the future like that. This is not going to slow down. Just obviously be aware of that. So appreciate you guys for tuning in. We really love we love the support you've shown us. We love getting to talk about this program and getting to cover this program. It's a blast for us. I love getting to do it for a living. I don't take it for granted at all. And y'all's support is one of the main reasons why y'all have shown us a lot of support. We really do appreciate you guys a lot. So if you are watching this and haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. Like the video. Leave us a review. We love hearing reviews from you guys, whether it's good, bad, hearing some things we can improve on. We're always looking for ways to do that, but we love hearing back from you guys, whether it's podcast and in this comment section on YouTube, whatever you guys want to do. We love hearing back from each and every one of you. We do take time to read them and try to make improvements on everything. So we appreciate you guys for doing that. Be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a review over there, and we will see you guys next time. Thank you for listening.